I am delighted to welcome you all to the September General Meeting Speaker Series, or whatever it is that KCWC has decided to call these meetings these days. I'm Mary Narvell. I'm president of KCWC, and some of you may remember me having stood at this podium several moons ago. That was when, fortunately, I could see all of you out here. And I have to say that was better as a speaker because I was able to tell if you were really listening. So now I just have to hope that at home, where you are today, with a cup of coffee and your laptop, you're comfortably going to enjoy the program that we've worked hard to put together today. And when I mean we, I also mean our loyal partners here at the Royal Geographic Society, without whom, I have to admit, none of this would have been possible. So, what do we say about running a social club in a pandemic? It's not easy, I have to be honest. But even though Margot Channing would have said, fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night, I'm here to make sure that we can all engage and that I can keep all of you interested in what KCWC still has to offer. I'm determined to do that, and I'm hoping that all of our members will support us and bring new members along, because the KCWC product still is the best there is. So, where do we begin? Well, normally, by now, Teresa Clausen, our past president, and our current vice president would have been able to enjoy a really great send-off. She would have received a gift, and we would have had a tribute to her. And even though I know Teresa has zero desire to have a gift, I'm hoping that we can do that in October at this podium. And all I'll say, Teresa, is good things come to those who wait. Then, many of you may think that when you get that quick answer, and it's correct, and someone's there to help you out of a problem with the website, or your Zoho mail app, or any of the other things that KCWC offers, that we have little magic elves or fairies in the background, not real people doing this work. But I'm here to tell you they are real, and two of them I have to thank today, Suzanne Schultz on the website and Karen Gustovich in e-communications. I can assure you, without them this summer, I don't know what I would have done, and KCWC would have really had a problem. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And then the Programs Committee, which is really important today, because without their help, we wouldn't have been able to put together not only today's program, but to go back to the way things were when we used to have our schedule already set through to the end of June. So my thanks have to go out to Vivian Matthews, Wendy Mail, and Philia Chen for all that they're doing to make sure that KCWC has fascinating programs. Please look on the newsletter or the website so you're prepared for what's coming all the way through to June 2021. Just a few quick housekeeping hints before we go ahead. Some of you may have had login issues where you go onto the website and you log in and then you're automatically logged out. I know, this is why I use hair dye. My mother had an expression that I sleep on 7 pillows. Well, fortunately, I'll be the one who's having the sleepless nights. We're working it out. Web.com is getting it sorted. In fact, I'm told it may already be done. So try not to worry. The website does work beautifully, and we're doing our best to get it going. Activity codes. While I love, as an activity leader, getting your emails asking me if there's a code you need to register for one of our events, the good news is you don't need activity codes anymore. That's one of the new revelations with this website. You just go online, pick the activity you want to do, and then miraculously buy a ticket or register interest. No need anymore to deal with the activity leaders. And membership cards, another one that's giving me a few gray hairs, but we know there's a backlog. We are working to try to smooth it out. And we're also working with Web.com to move to virtual member cards. So that's our way of trying to make sure that everything at KCWC runs smoothly. Now, I'm thinking that I can probably get to the main event here and introduce Marisa Drew. And yes, I can. So first of all, we have a tradition at KCWC of bringing extremely accomplished women in front of our member base of extremely accomplished women. And we're also very proud of the fact that we are always in the vanguard. We're interested in new things. We're trying to learn about technologies or business or any idea that is new and upcoming. And in today's speaker, Marisa Drew from Credit Suisse, we're able to achieve both. I have to say a special shout out to Philia Chen, who orchestrated and arranged this meeting for us because she and Marisa Drew are both graduates of the prestigious Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And how do I know that you have to be very intelligent to go to the Wharton School? I have a brother who's an alumnus of the Wharton School, and he spends an awful lot of time trying to convince me how brilliant he is. So I know it has to be a very good place. Now, if you won't mind, I'm going to, in order to do justice to Marisa's CV and her excellent background, I'm going to just please refer to my notes, because even her title, which has, I'm told, just changed, is rather daunting. So I am delighted to welcome Marisa Drew, who is CEO of Credit Suisse's Impact Advisory and Finance Department. She is actually, that's the wrong title. I think I have the old title. Well, at any rate, we'll have the new title on the slide, I promise. Ms. Drew is a veteran of many panels talking about advocacy of gender parity. She has risen in a world of corporate finance that we know is very male-centric, and she's done so in a company that is in the vanguard itself. And I can tell you, judging from her PA and her assistant, that their ability to be flexible and move and answer the needs that we had as a client are every indication of how great Credit Suisse is at being able to answer the needs of their clients. Ms. Drew was she was first named in the Financial News Top 100 Most Influential Women in Finance in 2007 and has annually been named to that list until 2018. In 2013, Radio 4 featured her on Woman's Hour when she was recognized by the BBC as one of the most powerful women in Britain. We are thrilled that a veteran of impressive panels from the World Bank to the Millikan Institute have accepted our invitation to address our own membership of impressive women. Marisa, I wish I could meet you in person, but this will have to do, and I will hand it over to you. And there will be questions at the close, so please do type them in for me, and I'll see you for a Q&A at the end of Marisa's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Hopefully you can all hear me clearly. So I thought I would maybe talk for a little over a half hour and then open it up for Q&A, and I would very much love this to be interactive because I always feel like people get the most out of sessions when they can ask the tough questions. But the team was very demanding in terms of what they wanted to talk about today. They first asked me if I would just give a little skip through my career and perhaps some career highlights and maybe not such the highlights of my career. I think we tend to learn more from those that set us back than the things that go well for us. And also maybe specifically focus on something that I chose to make very public that was, I guess, putting myself out in a vulnerable position. And that was my lean-in moment when the Sheryl Sandberg team came and asked me to be honest about something that affected me in my career, where I really had to make a decision to lean in. So we'll talk about that, and then talk about what I am very, very passionate about, which is my role at Credit Suisse and my new-ish title as of the end of July, which is the Chief Sustainability Officer and the global head of a group called Sustainability Strategy Advisory and Finance. And really at its heart, what I do every day is to try to mobilize capital to help solve some of the world's biggest social and environmental challenges. So first, maybe we can move to the first slide and just do a little skip through my CV. So I'm a kid that was never around finance. I can characterize myself as a person with a lot of energy, but no direction, always dipping in and out of things, and the daughter of an Air Force pilot. He was a Top Gun pilot, which meant that we moved around the world all the time. Every 2 years, we pretty much had a new posting. So in that respect, I had to figure things out pretty quickly as a kid, oftentimes being thrown into a new situation and having to figure it out, which I think was helpful to inform me in how I approach life and my career. But I was having tried a lot of things, I think first I in my career, I wanted to serve my country, very much probably following in the shoes of my father. And that manifested itself in me thinking that I might want to follow into the world of politics. And I was able to get an internship with my then first year congressman. And very quickly, after a few months, realized that this idealistic congressman was very much, unfortunately, having to respond to those who were the biggest lobbyists in his constituency. And that was a little bit disheartening for me. So I decided career in politics was perhaps not the thing for me. And then I went off to serve in a different way in the State Department and was able to work for the then most wonderful George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State at the time. And I loved the idea of potentially being a diplomat until I realized that diplomats are actually political appointees, and you don't work your way up the career service ladder often in the State Department in that respect. And I found the pace being a little slow for me, being the kid with a lot of energy and a short attention span. So then I turned to the world of the corporates, and I had my first internship in a corporate environment in an office. And there, once again, I found the pace very slow. I found that I had more to give than perhaps the organization was ready to give to me. And I just hadn't found that thing that lit my passion. And then I went to university. And when the banks came to recruit on campus, one of the things that I noticed about the bankers was something about the way they talked about what they did. The fact that they were always talking about juggling multiple balls all at once, the fact that they were completely engaged, that the markets kept them interested and there was never a dull moment, all those little snippets spoke to me. And that began my career in finance. Knowing nothing about investment banking, I got very, very lucky to have an analyst position in an investment bank. And back in the days of the mid-'80s, the analyst programs were very limited in nature, about 30 people. And they were very defined, where you had to go in for 2 years. And after 2 years, they kicked you out and said, if you want to come back to investment banking, you must get your MBA. At that point, I didn't feel like I had had enough life experience. And so I tried to dabble in private equity as thinking that going from being in the client service business to being the client might be a little bit the be all end all. And then I jumped into the wonderful world of private equity as a very junior person in a private equity shop. And I found myself doing everything from doing deals, which is what I was there for, to actually fixing the copy machine, because that's what you do in a small organization. But I spent so much time doing things that didn't have to do with completion of transactions, which is really why I wanted to be in that business, that I quickly found out that that wasn't for me. I think you're getting the pattern here. Dip in, dip out, a lot of trial and error. And then my next adventure was to be an entrepreneur. I had people approach me and say they would back me with capital if I would think about running a business. And perhaps you could turn to the next slide, because I think there's a few more detailed points on the following slide for the team in the back there. There you go. Anyway, so I jumped off into the world of being an entrepreneur, always thinking that maybe that was something I was going to do in my 50s, not my 20s. But I also thought that if I didn't give it a try, I would always be asking myself, what if, or what would have happened if I had tried it? As an entrepreneur, because I think so many people think that this is such a wonderful career opportunity, it is for many people, but I found it to be incredibly stressful. I've learned a lesson along the way that there is good stress and there is bad stress in life, and the good stress propels you on and gives you energy. The bad stress weighs on your shoulder and it becomes somewhat oppressive. And when I was an entrepreneur, when I found that every single decision of the life and death of my company was down to me, that was really oppressive stress. And I also realized very quickly that having been in large organizations where I had lots of resources and people who I respected that I could collaborate with and bounce ideas off of, those were things that I really enjoyed. And when I was an entrepreneur in a startup, that was pretty lonely. And I just found that it was not the opportunity for me. I was very lucky because someone came along and offered to buy my business, and I felt like I was absolutely freed. And then I did what most people do when you don't know what to do with your life, and I went back to school. So at that point, I went and got my MBA at the illustrious Wharton University, and I'm a huge fan of that opportunity set. It was a place for me to find myself, to spend some time doing some self-introspection, ask myself really honestly, rather than having people project on me what would be a good career path for me or the direction of travel. And I then started to ask myself, of all those experiences that I had along the way, which were the ones that really resonated with me as a person? What are the things that I like doing, and what are the things I really didn't like doing? And at that point, all the opacity that I had leading up to that point, when I asked myself those questions and really was honest with myself, the path became pretty clear. For me, I loved banking. I liked the pace. I liked the adrenaline rush of doing transactions. I loved the intellectual stimulation of being in the markets and in being around high achieving people. But the first time around, I was in a part of investment banking that was less appealing to me. And when I asked myself, why was it that I was so captivated with this idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur? What I realized was I like people who are entrepreneurial in mindset. I like the way they think. I like the way they take risks, but I just didn't want to be one. But the next best thing to being an entrepreneur, of course, is being a banker to an entrepreneur. And the idea that I could be a partner with these types of individuals and be in their ecosystem and be a critical part of what they do every day. Because, of course, when you are a startup in particular, one of the most important things for your survival is access to capital. So if I could be that person that could provide that lifeblood of capital to these budding companies, that to me was the holy grail. So I came out of business school and went back to investment banking, but very deliberately financing those early growth companies. And I never looked back after that. So 30 years later, I'm still in the business. Hard to believe. Sometimes I can't, I can't even conceive that it's 30 years later. But what is amazing to me is all these years later, I do get up every day, and I wish I had 24 more hours in a day. And I think that's the mark of finding your passion. It was not a straightforward journey for me. I am a big believer in trial and error. And how do you know? I always say half of life is finding out as much what you don't want to do as it is what you do want to do. But how do you know that unless you are willing to take some risk and dip in and give it a try? But anyway, I found my spot. I found my passion. Lots of other things came along the way over time. I ended up running our investment banking business, which was nearly $1 billion business and had about 1,000 people. And then 3 years ago, I jumped off into this incredible world of sustainable finance and really taking the summation of 30 years in investment banking and using all of that expertise and history in the capital markets and being around the advisory side of companies and investors to help mobilize capital to try to solve some of these big world challenges. So when I was debating leaving the world of investment banking, which was a well-trodden path, and jumping off into something that was completely nonlinear and a space that was really sort of at its nascency, it was a career risk for me. But I have to give due credit to my then CEO who asked me a question, a pretty profound question, which is, what do you want your legacy to be? And when you're in a bank, when you're a banker, typically what you sort of chest pound about and what you sort of want to wave the flag about is the last deal you did, the last biggest IPO, the last biggest M&A deal. But I thought about that, and as I was really sort of digesting the message he was sending me, I realized that there's always going to be another bigger IPO, another bigger M&A deal. But if the sum total of those 30 years of experience could be that maybe I could make a difference in the world with that expertise, what a good thing to have on the old epitaph. So that started me off into this space. If we can turn to the next slide, though, the team had asked me to share some career sort of learnings, do's and don'ts. And hopefully these are applicable whether you're in the working world or, frankly, just in life. I always have, when I counsel people, they ask, what makes somebody stand out in a very crowded world or a large, complicated organization? And I always say, at the early stages of your career, develop unassailable technical skills. Invest the time in the beginning of your career to really build a foundation and make yourself that indispensable go-to person. You want to be the person that everybody wants to work with. And for most of my career, I was the first, the only, the science experiment because I was the only woman. And a lot of times people didn't know what to do with me because I was this weird creature and I didn't really fit in. And I found that my way of operating in that system to sort of make sure that I was being perceived the way I wanted to be perceived was trying to really build that good technical foundation. And then the second bullet point on the do's is own what you do. I always say if you believe that everything you do, whether it's a work product, whether it's a task, whether it's a club, if you view what you do as a reflection of yourself, it's a sort of a mindset orientation. And if you're proud of what you contribute, as opposed to having a checklist and saying this just checks the box, those are the people to me that stand out, and they're the people that I want to surround myself with, but they're also the people that I've seen over 30 years are the ones that really excel. This is a biggie, and I think you're already doing it by being part of this club. But network feels like such a trite, overused phrase. But networking is so critical. If you're in a complicated, large organization where you need tentacles across the organization to help provide a support network for you, or frankly, just in my case, and I'm a people person, I get energy from people. The concept of network, which sounds very sort of Machiavellian or strategic, to me is just more about connecting with people. But the broader you cast your net, I believe, the more opportunities you create for yourself, and the more it opens your eyes and opens doors. So in the work context, when I'm advising people, I always say, set yourself an objective to meet somebody new who is not in your frame of reference, not in your command chain, not in your day-to-day part of what you do. Set yourself a goal, just like any other task, once a month or once every month, whatever cadence makes sense, and go out of your way to meet somebody new. Just establish a connection. And especially in a large organization, or if you're coming up the career ladder in a large company, that little bit of investment in time pays you back a world of difference. If we think about examples like a promotions committee, I always say there's two ways that this could go down. And promotions committee, almost by definition, in large companies are made up of a good cross-section of people across a firm. If they're sitting around that committee and people say, what do you think of her? And they say, don't know her, don't know her, don't know her, don't know her. And the only person who's championed your cause is your sponsor. That's one outcome. If another outcome is a whole bunch of people around the table say, I've never really worked with her, but boy, she reached out and I know who she is. I know what she does. I've got a view on her. You come to a very different outcome. So that's just a little example of how networking in the career progression context makes a difference. In that same vein, the last bullet point on the do slide, in terms of viewing all external parties as potential clients, is another interesting one, and it connects very much into networking. What I mean by that, and I'll give you a very clear example, and there's 1,000,001 examples where I can tell you in my career where this has benefited me, but a lot of us sometimes want to go into our own little hovel or hole, especially when in the good old days when we were traveling and you were doing those awful commuter flights to some city to go pitch some piece of business. You get on the plane and you put your head down and you get into your book or your newspaper and you wouldn't look up until the flight's over. I used to force myself, not in an obnoxious or aggressive way, but to try to actually strike up a conversation if the other party was willing and the person in the seat next to me. So to establish some kind of a connection, because almost by definition, if somebody was on that early commuter flight heading to whatever place in whatever location, they were probably a business person and we were going to the same location. So maybe there was something to be said for that. One very good example of that is I was on a plane one time and I had been for 6 months trying to get access to a company that was overbanked. They kept sending us messages like, yeah, very interesting, but we got plenty of banks calling on us. We don't need another one. And we just were making no headway. And I was sitting on a plane and I happened to look over and the gentleman next to me was reading, of all things, Rolling Stone magazine. And there was an article about a concert that just so happened to be at the O2 Arena, the Led Zeppelin concert. For those of you of a certain age, you'll probably smile about Led Zeppelin. I grew up with Led Zeppelin in my high school. It was the prom song my year. It was Stairway to Heaven. Anyway, I'm a fan, but they came out of retirement after 20 years and played this big concert at the O2 Arena. And one of my big transactions that I'm very proud of was building the O2 Arena for one of my great clients. And I happened to look over and I said, "Oh, do you like Led Zeppelin?" And this sort of stuffy business person, sort of his eyes light up and he said, "Oh, yes, I love them. And if I could have only gone to the concert and blah, 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 blah." I said, "Oh, well, I was so fortunate to go to this concert, blah, blah, blah." We strike up a conversation. I talk about the fact that I built the O2 and I was there right in the front row and all this. The guy just opened up, lit up, and we got talking about music and life and all kinds of things. By the end of the flight, we just exchanged business cards. And wouldn't you know it, this was the CFO of that company that I've been trying to get access to for 6 months, just because we had a moment to talk about a silly little concert that wasn't so silly to him. So anyway, that's what I mean by establishing contacts, networks. You never know where those connections can make a difference. I'm going to move over to the derailers because I want to make sure we have time to talk about sustainable finance. But a couple that are biggies for me that I learned along the way. Negative attitude. We're all susceptible. You're going to have bad days or bad months or bad periods or bad bosses, and you're going to want to whine and moan and vent. And I always say, particularly if you're a senior person, think about that negative attitude and what the reflection is, the ripple effect of that attitude on people who are around you, whether it's in the work context or whether it's in a club or some other arena that you're participating in. You know, I do believe negative energy projects negative energy. And if I think about who I want to work with or be around or look up to, it's people who are positive and can do attitude type people that want to get things done. And sometimes, you know, we have to fight that urge to be susceptible or negative, particularly in the work context. So I say people do not want to follow people who are negative. The other biggie for me is a misplaced interpretation of events. This is a very, very big human nature thing. You're walking down the hall one morning, you pass your boss and you say hello, and the boss doesn't say hello or even look at you. What's the first thing you do? Oh my God, what did I do? What did I do? Oh my God, my career's over. My boss hates me, blah, 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 blah. And you go into this huge negative spiral. And frankly, most of the time, your boss just had a bad morning, got in an accident on the way to work, or whatever else is going on in their mind. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. But we've got to sometimes resist that human nature to spiral into a negative interpretation of events, because that can be a real derailer. And then I will lastly touch on letting a setback paralyze you, because that's my lean in moment. As I said, I took a very, vulnerable decision to put myself out there on a lean in moment, because my moment was when I was at my old firm, progressing up the ladder. I thought I was doing everything right. I was the biggest producer on an objective numeric basis in this particular group at the time. I was also that one firm person who was doing everything for my bank. I was the poster child for all of the initiatives and the projects and the task force. And I always said yes to everything. And frankly, I had the company logo, I say, somewhere deeply tattooed on my body. I was that kind of person. And my boss left, and an opportunity came up for him to name his successor. And I had pretty much all of my peers saying, "This is obvious. It's a shoo-in for you. You're natural. Of course, you're going to be picked as the successor to lead this group." And that was my really, really big objective and goal. I wanted to run a big business, and I got passed over for promotion. And it's bad enough when you're passed over for promotion generally, but when you're passed over for promotion, when pretty much everybody's saying the job should have been yours, it's deeply, deeply raw, but it's also humiliating. And I had to kind of check myself, because my first inclination was, that's it, my career's over, back to the negative spiral thing. And it really, really hurt. And I just couldn't understand, but then I started to question my capabilities. I started to ask if I was missing something. And after, some pretty dark moments, I decided to, instead of letting it consume me, I would really try to find out some facts. Was there a perception gap? And probably all of us know somebody who's got a perception gap in terms of how they perceive themselves and how others perceive them. And I wanted to, whether it was going to be bad news or good news, I wanted to find out if there was a perception gap. And I thought more of myself than maybe my colleagues and my peers and others thought of me. And I went and checked around with people who I really respected, asking those hard questions. And, to my pleasant surprise, they said, "No, this is not the case. We viewed you in the context of being a group head and a group leader. and you really, on all objectives and subjective measures, really shouldn't be running this group. So at that moment in time, what I realized was it was just life. Life doesn't always go your way. And in this instance, the gentleman who picked the successor picked a guy that he had worked with at another bank who he felt comfortable with. And they had, basically had the same career path and were in the same clubs and went to the same school and the usual thing. So at that point, I had to swallow my pride and accept it, or I could do something about it. And at that point in time, for me, I felt that a little bit of the contract was broken, that contract that said I'll do everything in my power to try to make a success of where I am and do everything for the bank and the firm, but I expect the same in return. And when that sort of moment happened, for the first time in over a decade, I looked up to see what else was out there. And rather than let it consume me, I decided to be proactive about it. And I did have a lot of support and help, and I was surrounding myself with people that, reminded me that I got that far because I earned it. And then I looked up, and then I was offered an opportunity to change firms, and I took a calculated risk because that decision was in line with what I was doing, but offered me a bigger opportunity. And now when I look back, if I had not had that moment, and if I had not taken the risk to move firms, there is no way I would have ever been in a position to run investment banking. And so sometimes those life moments, rather than letting them consume you, can actually create an opportunity for you if you have the right mindset. And it also sometimes means that you've got to take a little bit of risk to get outside your comfort zone, because jumping firms and starting a new business somewhere else, it doesn't always work. But at least I said it's a calculated risk because I'm not switching firms and switching careers and switching jobs and switching everything. It's a lot of what I was doing before, but in a different location and a different organization. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then I will, again, be happy to talk about all of this when we open it up for Q&A, but I'd love to jump into the fabulous world of sustainable finance next. So if we can turn the page. So I call this the deep dive into the sustainability wave. So let's go to the next slide. So I view my business and the sustainability agenda as really responding to what I call the whole group of stakeholders. It's a multi-stakeholder response is what I feel is my mission here. What I mean by that is in Credit Suisse, we have three main client segments. We have a large private bank, and people act with us and interact with us as individuals, investing their personal wealth with us. We also act in the global markets arena with large institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, the BlackRocks and other asset managers of the world. And thirdly, we have corporate clients. So these are the companies, whether they be large cap companies or early stage startups, all of those are clients of the bank. And all three of those client segments are dealing in some way with this whole concept of purpose. And how do I make my money work for the good of society? How do I solve environmental problems and so on? And I can tell you in the private client arena, we are facing the single largest wealth transfer in history. As we move from the baby boomer generation to the next gen, as they are growing their wealth and inheriting their wealth, they do not like the world they're inheriting, and they want to do something differently about that. And that is what I'm responding to help allow them to align that passion and that activist energy with doing something positive with their capital. On the institutional investor side, very similar phenomenon with a slightly different twist in that if you're running a pension fund today, you have the people who give you money, your pensioners asking things that they never asked before. What are you doing with my money? Are you investing in an environmentally friendly way? And so on. And of course, with the pandemic, what has really surfaced are the gross inequities of the world. And people desperately want to understand that the people who are managing money for them are thinking about backing causes or companies that really have the social agenda at their heart as well. And lastly, on the corporate side, we have a phenomenon going on, which, frankly, in my generation, we didn't do. When the next gen talks about the companies that they want to patronize, they ask questions like, what is your environmental footprint? What is your plastic? What is your packaging? Is it single-use plastic? What are you doing in terms of employee and social issues? And the next gen, if there's not a good answer of the corporate of that topic, they don't have a response, they'll go and patronize somebody else. And sometimes they start viral campaigns against those companies who are not doing things well. And corporates are trying to figure that out. I mean, this is profound for the corporate agenda. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, if you are a company in a high carbon emitting industry with the march of climate change on us and being very, very real, there's a lot of agitation. If you're an oil and gas company today, you are not in the happy zone. You have shareholders coming and forming coalitions and beating you up and saying, I want a new agenda change. There's threats that say if you don't have a good climate narrative and you don't transition, I'm not going to hold your stock. And you have regulators breathing down your neck saying, what are you going to do about transitioning, and so on. Regulators are a huge piece of this equation. I view regulators as a manifestation, frankly, of political will. So when you see President Macron, Justin Trudeau, even Xi Jinping, who've said they want to be the green tech leader of the world, these politicians and leaders ripple that through their systems, often in the form of regulatory policy. And it is amping up like we've never seen before. In my world, in the banking industry, we have regulators coming now to banks in Europe with a new piece of regulation, which is part of this EU agenda, saying, we want you, banks and asset managers, to demonstrate to us that you've taken E, S, and G into consideration, environmental, social, and governance issues into consideration in the advice you give and the investments you create. That's a big intervention on the part of regulators. So this is the phenomenon that's happening. And then last but not least, for those of you who are in the corporate world, there is no more important topic for employees than this. I love sharing a story that 3 years ago, when my position was announced that I was moving from investment banking to take on the sustainability agenda for the bank, it was an absolute epiphany moment for me. I got 100 CVs within the first day or two in my inbox with the most emotive cover letters I've ever seen. All capital letters, like, I must be part of this. This is fantastic. Please bring me into your business. This is, what I need purpose and meaning in my job and my career. Please, 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 please. And one after another like this. 3 more days pass, and the same kind of thing was happening from people sending me CVs outside the bank. I want to be a part of this agenda. It was just such a big moment for me because I ran investment banking for 4.5 years, and I never once received an emotional cover letter like that with someone begging to be part of my business. So I said, there is something here in terms of connecting with top talent and what really motivates people at heart. So that's my business. So my business every day is getting to respond to these forces at work, which are just building and building and building in terms of their momentum. And it's a pretty, I have to say, privileged place to be every day. So if we can turn to the next slide. What is this whole thing? What is sustainable investing? There's a lot here, a lot to unpack, but at its core, I like to keep it super simple. Basically, sustainable investing is taking environmental, social, and governance characteristics into account when you're thinking about an investment in a single stock or an investment strategy in a fund or what have you. It's not rocket science. It's looking at these factors and trying to think about them in the context of risk and opportunity. And increasingly then, by doing that, you get to align the things that you care about. What are you passionate about? Is it the environment? Is it social causes? Is it healthcare? Is it education? Is it the oceans? And helping you to align those passions with those things that you really, really deeply care about, using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a lens or a frame increasingly. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. But so at its heart, nothing more than being better informed, having a different lens or a toolkit to think about investments, and therefore making better decisions. So if we turn to the next slide, I'd like to express this in the context of the climate with 2 quotes from people who I respect and who I think are leaders on the environmental movement field. The first is the great Al Gore, way, way, way ahead of his time with The Inconvenient Truth, when he was really waving the flag 20 years ago, believe it or not. It was 20 years ago that Inconvenient Truth came out and tried to warn us about the effects of climate change. But what Al will say today, when 20 years ago it was all about risk, be careful, be careful, be careful, and he was really trying to almost spook people or scare people into action. Today he switched his tone a little bit and has instead said, It represents one of the greatest investment opportunities in history. And he says that it's at the speed, the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, because the whole world has to change to respond, or it's existential for all of us and humanity. But it's also happening at the speed of the digital revolution. And whether it is investing in electric vehicles or investing in the next plant-based food company, these opportunities that get created to grow enormous value are absolutely right there in front of us if we open our eyes to it. The opposite side of that coin is what Mark Carney is trying to express when he was the governor of the Bank of England and the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, is that equally, as much as it's an opportunity, it is a risk. So Al Gore was right. Are you thinking about environmental impacts on the investments that you hold? And also, frankly, and when we talk about investments, it doesn't have to be funds or stocks. It's also in things like your real estate. I have a coastal home in Connecticut, and I am literally on the water. And I can tell you that for sure, this is a home that my husband grew up in. And he used to say when he was a kid, he could see always the rocks coming out of the water. They're permanently out of the water. Today, those rocks are underwater, and the storm activity that's affecting our property increasingly every year is a scary thing. And if climate science is right, my house is probably going to be underwater in the next 20 years. So that's what we mean about thinking deeply about risk in all of your assets and making sure that you're responding to that and not ignoring it. Because if you do so, it really likely will be at your peril. Next slide. One of the things that inspires me every day is that in all of my years of a 99.9999% male-dominated world, men driving the agenda, what I love about sustainability in many respects is that women, in so many aspects, are leading the charge. Why? It's not difficult in my mind because we are so focused on thinking about what we're leaving for our next generations, our kids and our grandkids. And I know that we feel uncomfortable about the world we're living in. And so many of us want to do something about it with our purchasing habits, with things that we get involved in, with hopefully also your money, because your money speaks a pretty loud voice if you use it to positive effect. And I think it's worth always maybe taking a moment and reminding ourselves of that. So if you can turn to the next slide. I don't want to get into too much detail. I want to keep it sort of high level here, but I think of sustainable investing along a spectrum. So simplistically, traditional investments ask only one thing, which is to generate a return for their investors. That's it, period, full stop. Generate a risk-adjusted return. Where you enter the world of sustainable finance is when you equally seek to generate a return. So this is not philanthropy. You seek to generate a return from your investment, but in addition to that, you seek to either align your investments with those things you care about that are positive for the environment or social causes, or equally you avoid the things that don't align with your value systems. You don't want to invest in weapons of mass destruction, or you might not want to invest in tobacco or things that, again, don't align with your values. That's the journey that begins with sustainable investing. So it's not just a return, but it's also trying to do something positive or something values aligned. And as you move further and further along the spectrum, the amount of impact that you can have or want to have with your investments gets higher and higher. When we get into the world of what's called impact investing, there you're going even further. You're saying, I want to achieve a defined outcome with my money. I want to do something that's measurable. I want to, if it's education, I want to get kids in schools. I'm going to measure with my investment how much money my investment made in terms of getting kids in school. So I'm going to measure that statistic. If it's healthcare, how many people have I served with this investment? If it's environmental, how much water did I save or CO2 did I take out of the atmosphere? Impact investing, very deliberate, measurable, holding yourself accountable to the outcome of that investment. But all of these are intertwined in this concept of both getting a return and doing something good. But I also don't want to leave the fact that philanthropy is a critical component on this spectrum. Of course, philanthropy, you give your money away, you don't ask for a return or anything back other than to do something good with it. And that's important too. So, all along the spectrum, you can find your place, and hopefully, you find a mix of both because it's not the be all end all for any one of these. But hopefully, increasingly, what is the ethos and what gets people excited is if you can generate a return, and particularly a market rate of return with your investments, and you can do good. What's not to love? It's the holy grail, right? It's the icing on top. And that is, I think, what is so compelling about this whole world of sustainable finance. Next slide, please. So, how fast is it growing? Enormously fast. So, today, the overall concept of sustainable investing is about a third of the overall market and growing at enormous rates. Whether you talk about the overall market, which is about a $40 trillion market today, or you talk about that sharper end of the spectrum, that impact investing end, growing at north of 1,000% every year, admittedly coming from a small base, it's capturing the hearts, minds, and attentions of the investors. Green bonds is another area, again, growing. So no matter which way you look at it, this is a market that's here to stay and increasingly becoming mainstream. And my belief is that over time, we're going to not even talk about whether something's sustainable or not sustainable. It's just the way people are going to start their thinking about and incorporating that thought into their investment habits. Next slide. So if there's further evidence of it, just check out this chart about sustainability and Google. This curve just shows you how many people are Googling the word sustainability, really trying to understand, join the journey, figure it out. And this gives me a lot of hope and enthusiasm that I guess I'm on the right track with my career right now. Next page. One of the things that I also point to is, and I alluded to it a little bit with this intergenerational wealth transfer, is this millennial energy or next gen energy. We have, and are privileged to have, some of the wealthiest people in the world as our clients in our private bank. And one of my great joys is that I get to interact with their kids. And these kids, they shouldn't even call them kids, they're young adults, are beginning to inherit wealth or grow their own wealth, especially the millennial generation is entering their peak earnings years. And when you ask them what is the number one legacy they want to leave, it's a positive impact on the planet. I can tell you, having recruited at Wharton for 20 years ago when I used to ask the next gen what was the most important thing for them, they'd say, I want to make money. I want to make lots of money. That was the thing that they wanted to do. Today, when I interview Wharton candidates, they ask me, well, my most important thing is to make a difference in the world. So tell me about your bank. How many green IPOs have you done? And how many, positive IPOs have you done that have a social environmental aspect to them? Explain your corporate purpose. I mean, these are things inconceivable to me 20 years ago that someone would be asking me, and I love it. And by the way, this generation, talking about the powerful consumer force, because they demand things of these companies before they'll give them their money, this consumer wallet is huge. It's making companies respond. And I love the fact that this generation largely is saying they are even prepared to pay more for sustainable products. That's how much they care. And by the way, as they begin to inherit and grow wealth, they're exhibiting the exact same behavior in their investing habits. They're coming to people like me saying, what's your sustainability offering? I care. I want to make those alignments. And what is the beautiful thing is this is also driving return. On the bottom right side, this little graph shows you millennial-focused companies, meaning companies that can respond to this energy, are outperforming the rest of the market. And that makes sense because if you're a company listening to your emerging and powerful customer base, you ought to capture more of their market share, and that creates value for you as a company as well. So this is why you see so many corporates trying to figure this whole thing out. On the next slide, equally, energy coming from all of us women. Women increasingly are saying that they want to invest in women-owned businesses or businesses that are run by female CEOs or have a high proportion of women in their organization. Why? Not just because we want to support women as a concept, because I think we deeply believe, and I'm very proud at Credit Suisse, that we created a research report back in 2014, which was the first one of its type in a very, very academically rigorous way to point out that companies with a higher proportion and at least 30% of women on boards and executive leadership outperformed on any metric, share price performance, return on equity, return on assets, and so on. At the time, that was a real groundbreaking eye-opener because it proved the business case for women in seniority and women in leadership. And we've updated that report many times, but this is, I think, what we all get intuitively. But sometimes we needed the little science and academia behind it to prove it to the guys. But anyhow, I love the energy from women. Women are very, very I would say, percentage-wise, outperforming their male peers in terms of your desire to align your investments with your passions. And also in terms of environmental stewardship, we hear over and over and over again that women prioritize environmental responsibility as a key component in the companies they might want to invest in. So the next slide. Then if I turn to the climate agenda, if I were to pull the clock back to January of this year, in early 2020, when we were in Davos, where the world's leadership all comes to convene, every year there's a poll that is taken about what people perceive as the biggest risks, whether those are political risks or the risks of war or economic risks or what have you. For the first time in history, all the top risks pointed to climate. So we call January of 2020 the climate Davos because that's all you heard in any of the circles: climate, 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 climate risk. However, if we turn to the next slide, what I think the pandemic has taught us is a couple of things. First of all, that the environment and social issues are inextricably interlinked. What's the pandemic taught us? Things like, and it is now, there was a study just literally out 2 days ago, a peer-reviewed scientific study that pointed to the fact that the higher polluted cities had worse incidence of people's reaction when they got the coronavirus. This seems obvious to me. I mean, if you have higher particulate in your air and you are talking about a respiratory disease, that you would have a higher reaction in the more polluted cities. But now scientists have actually proven the linkage. Environment, healthcare, interlinked. Equally, pandemics. The more that we sadly cut down rainforests and natural habitats of animals and bird life, the more they're going to have to find another home and the more they're going to have human and animal interaction. And noroviruses, which is what corona is a result of human-animal contact. And sadly, if we don't think about biodiversity and the environment in that context, we're going to see more of these types of pandemics and viruses upon us in the new world, unfortunately. So again, interlinked. Equally, if we look at some of the very difficult statistics that have surfaced by the pandemic, particularly for those in developing markets, the climate crisis is actually also a social crisis, and some of our looming social inequities have got to be addressed, or we are not going to have a healthy planet. We look at Brexit here in the UK. It was all about migration. Boy, oh boy, you haven't seen nothing yet until you think about migration associated with climate change. All of these developing countries, which historically traded on cheap labor and their agricultural-based economies, like Africa, like big parts of Latin America and Southeast Asia, with climate change, when the water dries up, when the storm activity happens, when it gets too warm to grow traditional crops, these people don't have a plan B. Most people in the lower base of the pyramid hardly have an education. They don't have ability to withstand changes into their work lives. So they are going to leave to find a better lives for themselves and their families. So we talk about climate migrants being billions of people. And these are issues that we're going to have to grapple with that are social as much as they're environmental. So this is why this is such a critical time that we invest in all these topics. Next slide. The good news is, just very quickly, that some people who are cynics would say, this ESG, the sustainable investing thing, yeah, it's sort of outperformed. They got lucky. Because what we've seen is through the pandemic, the vast majority of sustainable funds outperformed their peers. For those who say we got lucky, and the reason they say we got lucky is they say most sustainable strategies don't hold oil and gas stocks. And when the oil and gas prices dipped and in fact crashed, you got lucky. The reality is, if you look back over time at discrete points of a market shock and all sorts of events, whether it was political intervention or monetary policy or whatever the shock was, if we look back in history, sustainable strategies, as far back as we can go, because this is a relatively new field, are increasingly showing us that sustainable strategies outperformed. Next slide, please. To me, that's not a big surprise, because companies that are more environmentally and socially aware and which are well governed, almost I would think would be sort of stands to reason that they are more resilient. They probably have plan Bs. They probably have shorter supply chains. They're probably connecting with their customers better, and so on. So it doesn't surprise me that they're outperforming, but we need hard evidence to prove it. And with that hard evidence comes more and more enthusiasm. So this slide just shows you throughout the crisis and beyond, money flowing into sustainable strategies went up, 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 while people were pulling money in the crisis out of traditional strategies. And we hit an all-time high this summer in terms of the money coming into this space. And again, I think it is more to the point of all these factors at work saying that people are excited about this idea of these linkages. Next slide. So I talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who don't know what they are, please, 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 I encourage you to get familiar. This is the UN saying, let's break down the world's biggest challenges into 17 categories that allow you to affiliate with the things that resonate with you. Gender equality, healthcare for all, life below water, which is our ocean and a blue economy, and so on. It's the language that the investment community is using and civil society is using and politicians are using. So it's really important that you do get familiar with it, because it'll just allow you to be part in a more effective way of all of this, because more and more sustainable investments will be tagged to an SDG. So I am creating investments that say, I want to help support SDG 14, life below water, oceans. So if you're familiar with that, you can look for investments that have an SDG 14 logo on them and know that you're doing good for the oceans. And these goals also, when they came out, they helped science and academia actually calculate the cost if we're going to try to solve these problems by 2030, which is the goal. So we don't have a lot of time. There's about a $3.5 trillion gap annually that needs to be filled. Sounds like a really big, scary number, but the reality is, as a percentage of total global capital flows, it's less than 2%. So just allocating 2% of the world's capital every year towards these factors gives us a fighting chance that we can get there. And I think the enthusiasm and momentum that you saw in the previous slides gives me hope that with the trillions of capital being directed this way, it is happening. Next slide, please. So we also try, in a very scientifically and academically rigorous way, to think about value creation in the context of big trends in society and the world, and think about those as big investment themes. And then in my group, I then tag the UN SDGs along those themes. So themes like millennial values, we touched on that. Themes like technology at the service of humans. Look at how we're communicating right now online. Before the pandemic, online digital education was 3% penetration globally, despite 2 decades of digital education and Khan Academy and all these organizations trying to promote digital learning. Only 2% of global education was consumed digitally. You get the pandemic, overnight, 90+% of the world is consuming all of its education online. If you were invested in these technology companies, tech at the service of humans, you would have had an enormous rate of return. And things like telemedicine, giving scans to people without access to doctors and hospitals in rural areas. These are huge, huge, huge opportunities to create value, to create return for yourself, but also to deliver something positive for humanity. So you do not have to give up returns to do good in the world. Next slide. How do we sometimes do this in some kind of a digestible investment format? Well, I'll give you an example. So millennial values, we talked a lot about that, what's driving the behavior, but what do these millennials really care about? What do they want to invest in? What are the themes? Sustainable urban systems, they love the idea of smart cities, sustainable transport, electric vehicles, sustainable supply chains. We learned from the pandemic Those companies that had long, complicated supply chains were the first ones that were cut off and had real problems. Sustainable agriculture, the plant-based food movement, sustainable lifestyles, getting rid of the bad practices of the fashion industry. When I raise these topics with my next gens, they light up, they are fired up. And so I decided to create a fund around these topics called the Responsible Consumer Fund. I deliberately made this available and structured it for those who were emerging investors, so suitable for retail and didn't have to be highly sophisticated investors because the risk profile was suitable. But also I brought the minimums way down to 100 Swiss francs, euros, or dollars, where the young investor or even you as a parent could give an allowance to your child and say, why don't you practice maybe investing along these themes? And I'm thrilled to say that the performance of this fund through the pandemic was differentially outperforming regular benchmarks. So these themes are resilient and they're pretty exciting. And when my next gens, get invested in these sorts of opportunities, they come back to me and they begin the storytelling of the companies that they support. So next slide. Just to give you a little of an example of how we approach it, the sustainable food arena. So sadly today, the way we produce, consume, and waste food is hideous for the planet. 40% of all fresh produce in the world goes to waste. We probably know that from the things that are rotting in our fridge. We know that, sadly, our affinity for meat is not healthy for the planet. A livestock consumes 20 times more water than a plant-based alternative. And on it goes. I mean, many of us are aware of these statistics because of how well the media is profiling them. So what does the sustainable food movement do? It creates a much more environmentally friendly alternative. Next slide. And these companies, these disruptors, are creating real value. If we can turn the slide, please. One example is the incredible phenomenon of Beyond Meat. I love to tell the story that when I moved to the UK 20 years ago, if you said you were vegetarian, you were woo-woo. If you said you were vegan, you were from another planet. That was 20 years ago. Look where we are today. In 20 years, every single restaurant has a vegan, a gluten-free, a vegetarian option, and on it goes. This little company, Beyond Meat, which was not trying to serve vegetarians, it was trying to solve the environmental problem of beef, is the best performing IPO in the stock market, was at the time of offering, and we were a proud underwriter, and it has gone on to have a 700% return for its investors. But more profoundly for me, never in my lifetime did I think we would see a plant-based burger in every Burger King, McDonald's, you name it. Every fast food chain has one of these now plant-based alternatives. Profound, profound change driven by millennial values trying to solve an environmental problem. Next page. And by the way, I grew up in the 70s. We had plant-based burgers back in the 70s, but they didn't work because they were nasty smelling and tasting and what have you, right? We were probably, some of us remember those things. Blah. What this technology has done was to provide a credible substitute that you can close your eyes and really think as you, from a texture and taste point of view, you don't have to sacrifice. And that's the moment at which the product could scale. So we, again, aren't, when you're talking about whether it's returns or the products, you're not talking about sacrifice. You're talking about delivering something that does good while delivering on the consumer proposition in every way. Another big issue on these themes, just to put some flavor on the lifestyle bit, is the fashion industry. Sadly, it is one of the most polluting industries out there, not as well known as fossil fuels, but whether it's wastewater, whether it is sadly fast fashion where items are produced to be worn once and then thrown in a landfill, that is not sustainable behavior. The microfibers coming off of many of our goods when we wash them are putting this concept of nanoplastic into our water systems. And today we are consuming, by research, about a credit card's worth of nanoplastic every year. Every human. That is a scary statistic, and that is obviously not good for our health. So we want to change that equation. So the disruptive response, next slide, please, are companies that are appealing to these millennial sensitivities of wanting to do something different. You see millennials rejecting increasingly fast fashion. It used to be really interesting to see it on the runway and buy it 5 minutes later. but I can tell you my wave of committed activists are saying, I want higher quality and I want things maybe buy less. There's a whole new demographic called Generation Less. Buy good quality, buy a whole lot less, buy natural fabrics, buy them from companies that are good stewards, buy products that are made from recycled materials, the whole circular economy concept. These are the companies that are generating real value. The whole idea of consignments. Never again in my lifetime did I think that we would see a public company that was selling reused items of clothing. The Real Real is a good example of those, but there are many, many others, lots of them in London and in the UK, surfacing one after another of selling lovingly used goods, shall we say, and creating real value. Next slide. So it's not just also about the disruptors. It's also about the big corporate response. I think it is absolutely wonderful what Walmart is doing, where they're putting in their stores places where you can go and refill your shampoo bottles and your washing liquid bottles. So instead of having to create single-use plastic that is thrown away every time, you bring your old container in and they'll provide a dispensing station as one of the many responses to the plastics problem and the packaging problem. And there are endless examples of not only eliminating single-use plastics or packaging altogether, but moving to a place where the actual packaging itself is much more environmentally friendly, is compostable, is non-toxic, and so on. So the corporates, the large companies are recognizing if they don't change as well, they're going to lose the hearts and minds of the consumer. So you see this everywhere. So it's disruption, but it's also big cap corporate transition. Next slide. So I'm going to end here, and I know I've talked on and on. I'm not leaving a whole lot of time for questions, but just some of the big themes that I would point you to in the post-COVID world with this, I think, moment of awakening and reflection. On the left are a handful of themes that I see being big areas to get stuck into in terms of where the hearts and minds of investors are and this alignment of values and investing, whether it's affordable housing, electric vehicles. Let me just touch on electric vehicles for 2 seconds. I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but you all may remember coming out of the crisis that Boris Johnson, our prime minister, said he was floating or mooting the idea of giving every citizen £6,000 to scrap your diesel vehicle if you bought a fully electric vehicle. He's strategic if this comes to pass because manufacturing of EV companies happens in the UK. So it can be an economic stimulus. At the same time, we're moving to a greener economy. But think about his statement. If he were to give every single person £6,000 to scrap your old car for electric, think about if you're an investor in an electric vehicle component manufacturer or an OEM supplier, overnight he's probably created hundreds of billions of pounds worth of value in that sector. These are the kinds of interventions that are happening right, left, and center in these arenas that as investors you can make great money but know that you're contributing to positive societies. And lastly, on the left-hand side are just a few line items in companies that I think are going to be things that companies are going to need to disclose post-COVID and going forward, because this is what investors are going to ask about. What are your environmental and social policies? What are you doing about data protection and securing the identity of your consumers? What are you doing about employee health and safety? The companies that think about these things and respond to them and have good answers, I also think should point you in a direction of the kinds of companies that should outperform. So I'm going to stop there. And I know I've really cut into our Q&A time, but I'm happy to sort of open it up for questions, and hopefully maybe we can I can run a little over time before we have to cut things off.
Thank you, Marisa. I know I'm concerned about your schedule and how generous you're being, so I will cut straight to the chase here and give you a few of the questions that were submitted.
Okay.
One from Elena Garcia, talking about the promotion committee, can you select the best candidate to do the job when applying equality and diversity agenda at the same time?
Well, I believe if you are gender blind in your promotion processes, and a lot of that is about organizational design factors, the best candidates surface. And I am very well informed by actually one of the members on the group board of directors, a woman called Iris Bonet, who is a Harvard professor who has done a huge amount of work on organizational design that talks about embedded biases and processes. The classic example is in the orchestral world, where it was highly, highly male dominated. And then they put a curtain up when people went and were auditioning. And as soon as they did that, the proportion of women went up quickly, but it was still male dominated. And then they realized that even the judges who were behind the curtain, they could hear women in heels click-clacking as they were coming to their auditions. So even that subtle bias of maybe negatively predisposed to women were affecting their decision. So then when they put a sound barrier and a screen, guess what happened? 50% women in orchestras, and duly deserved, because there is no gender differentiation between musical talent. I think those same sorts of biases exist in organizations and promotion committees, and I would spend, if you're in a position of power and influence, looking for those biases, words that are used, name blind candidates, so candidates X, Y, and Z. Those sorts of things are the kinds of things I think that can make a really big difference, so that you don't bias one way or another. You just get the best talent.
It's fascinating because, of course, women are often, let aside. And that's why I think your own career trajectory is so remarkable, because you've had to, confront those issues where, as you say, they're lean-in moments. And yet, how many of us, think we have no problem here believing in the capability of women? But it's remarkable to me that people still do. Anyway, when you meet with corporate leaders of legacy industries,
Yes.
are they truly receptive to the agenda for change that epitomizes sustainable investments, or is it still lip service? Is it primarily new companies that are leading the way, like Tesla versus GM?
Mm-hmm. So it's such a great question. Like everything else, there's no one straight answer. I call it a spectrum. And in fact, we even think about this in a framework context at the bank as we try to drive our business to support and bank those that really want to change. We have a series of categories that we call unaware, meaning it's all happening around you and you truly are blind. We have kind of these are my words, not the bank's words, but kind of the unaware and don't care, i.e., I'm going to keep doing business the old way, and I'll just ride the party until the party's over. And then I genuinely believe that we have leaders that desperately want to change. Some don't know how to do it, and they're looking for advice, which is where I come in. And then we have the pioneers, which are out on the leading edge. When I think about pioneers, I think about companies like Unilever, Paul Pullman. He deeply believed in trying to be a better steward, both environmentally and socially, and he almost did it at his peril. I often say that those who are pioneers that are out on the leading edge are taking really big risks. It almost got him kicked out of his job at one point when the company's performance suffered because he was investing so much on doing things like cleaning up his packaging and taking chemicals out of his products and so on. Indra Nooyi, another case. Back in the day when she was investing in healthy snacks and water companies, there were certainly people questioning her strategy, saying, hang on a second, we're a sugary drinks company. Why are you taking us off piste, so to speak? And she got a lot of flack for that. But guess what? Look what is the fastest growing category of the overall Pepsi enterprise. It's the healthy snacks and food company. Water businesses, go figure. So I think that the answer is there is a spectrum. I will point even in the high carbon emitting industries to diametrically opposed situations. BP has just come out very, very vocally, and the CEO is on the road today saying that they are going to transform the company into effectively, for all intents and purposes, a green energy company. This is someone who's making a bold statement and going to move the entire organization. The converse is true in two cases. This last week, the CEO of Rio Tinto just was removed from his job because they went and made some disastrous investments that dislocated and severely harmed indigenous populations in Australia, where that company is based.
They excavated a site, didn't they? They excavated a site that was sacred, even though they had been told that these were preserved lands. And so he's history now.
That's right. He said, look how fast that happened.
Yeah.
Another example, Boohoo, which was a darling of the stock market here in the UK, when it was found that they had some pretty unfavorable labor practices, their share price dropped 50%. As soon as the news came out, it dropped like a stone. And then a lot of the people that interacted and dealt with them also dropped them. And the last one I'll point to is Exxon. 2 weeks ago was taken out for the first time since the 1920s out of the Fortune 50, having lost 280 billion of value over the last 6 years. 280 billion of value. So back to this ignore climate risk at your peril concept.
I'm going to just squeeze in one more if I can, because I know you have your board meeting to go to, which, may I say, is much more significant than this. So you're very generous to do this. This is a question that cuts kind of close to home, so I hope no one at Credit Suisse is listening. But you've said that you love the entrepreneurial mindset, but that Credit Suisse is a big corporate entity. So what have been the compromises or balancing acts that you've had to face to maintain the duality of your clients' needs while operating within a large global organization?
It's a wonderful example or a question. I almost by my nature, I am, as I said, back to that higher energy, short attention span person. I kind of dip in things, and I really want to get stuck in, and I want to have the freedom to experiment. And all along my career, I've sort of been that person who's pushed boundaries, usually structurally to try to serve my clients, obviously in a compliant way. Or experiment, which is what I have the great pleasure of doing now, because a lot of the investments that we are creating are things that have never been done before, or on sectors that have never really had for-profit investments been created around a theme. Like oceans is a good example, where we've just created a fund to try to mobilize capital for ocean conservation. That is a very, very undertrodden path, shall we say, from the private capital market. So I guess I've always gravitated toward roles that allow me to sort of express that entrepreneurial spirit in the form of creating something that's new and different. At the same time, I am part of a large organization, and we have to respect the boundaries and the governance characteristics that are there for good reason. Obviously, if I could, freely go out and do anything and everything, there may be risks associated with that. And as a steward of our clients' capital, I need to be very, very clear on what would be suitable both for the bank to take on, both in terms of the risk profile of the investment itself, and then the application of that to a client. And so I guess I'm always aware that there's regulation for good reason. And when regulation fails to serve, or we lose sight of what I would say the risks in our business, that's when things go wrong. So light touch regulation in many respects is a byproduct, or if not a catalyst, for the financial crisis that we had. So I guess I'm always mindful that there's a balance here. But I think as an individual, to be self-actualized, I always needed to be in roles that allowed me to express a little freedom. And the capital markets are a great place because they're very dynamic and they're ever changing, and nothing is ever static. So that's partly why I've been, I think, always in my career gravitating to places where I could, be very close to that fast-moving, fast-paced market arena, rather than something that is much more kind of a slow burn type of a job. But that's quite personal to how I'm wired as an individual.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I only wish that we had a live audience here to join me in applauding you and thanking you for giving us so much of your time. One of the things that we used in advertising this talk was your quote about passion, and it's obvious that that's not only what you have in terms of your own corporate growth, but in terms of the investment in sustainable investing. I think it must be so daunting to deal with a world changing as rapidly as it is now, but to have to do it when you're also involved with people's money is pretty overwhelming. So Marisa, thank you so very much. I hope again that I can see you not on a screen as I am here, but that we can thank you in person. I'm extremely grateful to you. In fact, I typed to your team that they couldn't have been more helpful, and thank you so very, very much.
That's very kind, and I'm sure that will go a long way to making their day.
Good,
Well, it was a real
good.
pleasure, and I think it's a wonderful organization. Having been a resident of South Kensington for 20 years, I'm passionate about our little borough, and congratulations to all that you're doing to put on hopefully meaningful events with
Oh,
your
I
children.
hope so. From your mouth to God's ear, I'll tell you, or to the doctor's ears. But no, we are trying. And of course, you can join us, become a member. You don't have to be a member of a resident of Kensington and Chelsea, but we would love to have you join us. And there's a lot to keep you busy and keep your spare time occupied. So
Sounds
thank
good.
you again very,
All
very
righty.
much. Bye-bye
Thanks for
now.
your time and attention. Bye bye
Thank
now.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. And so just to close, a few housekeeping tips that we have. And they have to do with our activities. Of course, there's going to be some confusion, even though I swore I wouldn't use the V word, virus word. There's going to be some confusion about whether or not our activities are going ahead. If you have a question, please always reach out to your activity leader. They're there to help, and some of them have written to me today to say, for example, our Zoom hospitality cocktail on September 17th at 5 p.m. That's obviously going ahead, and I can assure you I am going to be on that call after organizing this meeting. Then, Glorious Gardens, the Healing Plants trip they have on the 29th of September is sold out with a wait list. As it stands now, it is going to go ahead. And Lucy is also working for a save the date on Thursday, October 15th, where there will be a socially distanced, time-slotted guided tour of Fulham Palace Gardens with head gardener Lucy Hart, and then a chance to see neighboring allotments. I have an event with Antiques on September 24th as a substitute for the handbags exhibit at the V&A that was canceled. This is with Ann Hayworth about hats. It's a Zoom lecture, and I'd love it if you would join us. Details are online. And the book group. Sarah Colby has asked me to announce that Wednesday, October 14th, there'll be a virtual meeting to discuss the book, Three Women by Lisa Taddeo, and your input in the books that they're going to choose for the season is much appreciated. Which brings us to the next general meeting. Earl Spencer, the ninth Earl Spencer, Charles, has been marvelously cooperative and so wonderful about agreeing to come and speak. He is someone who last year's program committee organized. He's an old friend of KCWC, and he's game to come here to the Royal Geographical Society on Thursday, October 8th, where we hope that we will be able to meet, even if it's only a smaller group. Everyone here is game to proceed, and so am I, so there will be infection controls and one-way systems and a lot of security going on, but we will talk more about that in the weeks ahead. But do please diary the date, either in person or via Zoom, for Earl Spencer. He is going to be talking about his book, The White Ship. And thanks to technology, he has arranged a fabulous, easy link on our website where you just go to the KCWC website, click on News on the upper banner, and it will direct you to the link to the Spencer Althorpe website where you can purchase his book, which, may I say, he's being wonderful. He is personally dedicating copies. So this is more than just a signature. This is that you can actually say, I would love to have, dear Auntie so-and-so, this book is for you, and Christmas is coming. And since he is speaking without a fee, but for book sales, obviously I'm hopeful that KCWC will be as good as we've always been in selling books. And then the final plea. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen and read about the information that happened to Beirut, to our sisters in Lebanon after the explosions. Of course, there are so many people that need today, be it the California fires or the hurricane or people in the UK who need support and help. But something touched me when I saw this explosion in Beirut, and I realized what this city is battling. And I contacted the Federation of International Women's Association in London, our sister clubs, and they connected me to the Beirut Red Cross Appeal. The details about this link are in the e-blast that we sent out for this meeting. It would be wonderful if you could make any donation you can to support the people there who are struggling to rebuild, and find it in your hearts to have the true international outreach that KCWC is famous for beyond our very pampered boroughs here of Kensington and Chelsea. Finally, I don't want to forget hospitality. They are proceeding. We hope to have a hospitality lunch after that meeting, Thursday, October 8th. Details are on the website for Ognisko at the Polish Club, which is where I am about to head now to have my lunch. And again, I can't thank you all enough. I mean it sincerely when I say this organization means an awful lot to me. It did a lot for me when I came to London over 20 years ago. Goodness knows I have devoted an enormous amount of time in board service to KCWC, but I do it because I made my best friends here, and I really believe in it, and I hope that our members will support us to survive, as I said, that kind of bumpy road, but with seatbelts on and my Prozac prescription and hair dye, we're going to make it, I promise you. Thank you so much, and again, I'll look forward to seeing you here, October 8th. Bye-bye now.